From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 26. I'm very excited for this episode because I think it's very timely. We have a lot of athletes that are wrapping up their competitive seasons on the baseball front right now, and they're starting to brainstorm how to attack their off-season, not just strength and conditioning programs, but also their throwing programs. Whether to shut down, how long to shut down for, how to ramp up, what to include. And our guest today is an expert in this world and has spent 2 decades really honing in on how to attack both off-season and in-season throwing programs the right way. So we're definitely going to have implications for both folks who are trying to improve performance and also athletes who are going through rehab return to throwing programs. So we're really excited about this episode. I know I'll learn a lot, just like you all will. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. It's an all-in-one superfood supplement with 75 whole food sourced ingredients to support your body's nutritional needs across 5 critical areas: energy, immunity, gut health, hormonal support, and healthy aging. I'm an avid user of Athletic Greens myself, in spite of the fact that I tend to be a supplement minimalist. To me, this is a product that is much more like whole food nutritional insurance as opposed to a true supplement. The ingredients have been carefully selected at the highest quality, most natural source. You get essential vitamins and minerals, digestive enzymes, prebiotics, probiotics, and that's the zero compromise approach from the company. It's plant-based, sourced from whole foods at the highest quality, so you won't find harmful chemicals, artificial colors or flavors, preservatives, or added sugar. Really, it's perfect for folks who are gluten and dairy free, paleo, keto, vegan friendly, great for people who are intermittent fasting, all that fun stuff. Personally, I love it for obviously our athletes who don't get enough nutritional benefits from fruits and vegetables because they don't eat enough. So it's a way to kind of plug in holes in diets. But also I really like it for our college and professional athletes who may have complex travel schedules where quality food options aren't always at hand. On a personal level, I'm a husband, father of 3, and an entrepreneur. We split our time between 2 states, and I'm also still an avid lifter. So life is inherently crazy, and it can be stressful, and sleep deprivation is definitely something that we encounter. So I rely on Athletic Greens for part of my immune support, and believe firmly that it's made a big difference in keeping me healthy in spite of how crazy our lifestyle is. They've got a great offer in place. If you head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey, they'll get you 20 free travel packets with your purchase. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY, and you can claim your special offer. Today's guest had a college playing career between the Los Angeles Pierce Junior College and Cal State University at Northridge. He then went on to the Wichita Broncos of the Jayhawk League. After his playing career wrapped up, he progressed to the college coaching ranks, spending 4 years at Los Angeles Mission Junior College and College of the Canyons, and then 7 years as an assistant coach and consultant for the Chatham A's of the Cape Cod Baseball League. He founded Jaeger Sports on the principle that athletes need to develop both their physical and mental skills in order to be successful in game situations. Since its founding, he's published articles, books, and DVDs on everything from long toss to mental skills to yoga to meditation to arm care. Since 1991, he's worked with over 200 professional players, including Cy Young Award winners and All-Stars. He's also consulted with many Major League Baseball organizations and collegiate programs, ranging from UCLA and Oregon State to Auburn, Mississippi State, Cal State Fullerton, and Michigan. Please welcome to the show my good friend, Alan Jaeger.
Welcome to the show, Alan.
Hey, man, Eric, always great to connect with you. And for me, actually, I'm excited about this because it's just it's an opportunity that I get to hang out with you. So
always
I'm looking forward. Yeah, I'm looking forward to delving into this, man.
And it's fun too because you've spoken to our college crowd several years in a row, and the guys always love it. And we, with those, we try to cover a lot of different topics in an hour. And I'm almost really excited about this one because we're going to hone in and be a little bit more narrow in our scope because I think it allows us to dig deeper on a really important topic and something that's obviously near and dear to you. So you've obviously been well versed in a wide variety of skill sets ranging from yoga to mental skills to a lot of that stuff. But obviously your bread and butter, you'll always be known as the long toss guy, and you have a passion for both arm conditioning and reconditioning. Where did the interest in long toss start? How did you get going with it?
Well, first of all, you can't drop an arm conditioning and reconditioning on me like that without me commenting. That is just so you. The beginnings of it sounds kind of funny, but growing up, I didn't know, like none of us, nobody knew what a quote unquote throwing program was. So that's one of the reasons why I try to even stay away from using that term. But I didn't know what a throwing program was. All I knew is I went out, and at the time I didn't know it, but I was listening to my arm. As I tell everybody, I think the more you listen to your arm and just allow it to do what it wants to do without parameters, the more it wants to do. So for me, I had a rubber arm, and maybe part of that's DNA, but I also think a lot of it is I threw things all the time. I threw baseballs, football, whatever. I just like to throw. And I think that, so I was, part of the answer is I was just built, I think, for long toss because it's intuitive and it's instinctive. It's not something like, hey, this is a whole new program where it's kind of new. To me, long toss is actually organic and natural. So let's just start there. So number one, it was more of an organic thing. I think what happened is my first year in junior college, where I think maybe the awareness came to sort of a little more of a structure to it, was one of our kind of returning pitchers who everybody kind of looked up to. One day I was probably airing it out, and on the way in, I probably wasn't coming in with much intent. Cause to me, I think the main thing was really just stretching it out, cause it felt good. That's another reason why it's long toss to me is so intuitive. It just feels good to the arm, to the body, to the mind to stretch out at these gradual distances, at these gradual angles. And he said something to me that really sort of was one of those aha moments. He said, look, when you come back in, because I came back in slowly like we still preach, but he said, try to maintain your max. So let's say I was out to 300 feet. He told me, he said, look, when you come back in, maintain that effort behind that furthest throw. Don't just come in and ease up on the way in. And so something really clicked with that, because there was a magic to me all of a sudden, maintain the intent of my max distance throw, because all of a sudden, I would probably play burnout when I got closer, which is essentially pulling down and trying to throw it as basic as hard as I could. And that felt great because it was more of the explosive part of throwing and being athletic. But I think there was something about really building more of a connection with my release point, accuracy, and again, building that feeling of what it's like to really pull down or pull through throws all the way back in. So I think that piece of maintaining the intent of your furthest throw as you come back into your throwing partner was a game changer. So I think in a nutshell, Eric, it's sort of like long toss for me. It was really just something that was instinctive and natural. So it's not like I ever looked at it, studied in a book. I don't really remember anybody ever telling me what to do. I just feel like it was something that, look, the bottom line is throwing the ball with freedom and distance and athleticism. It feels good. It's intuitive. And this guy actually I remember his name. He was a great guy, Danny Gonzalez. He kind of filled in this piece about the pull downs, and I would say that was really sort of the origin.
It's funny. You talk about maintaining the arm speed, and like literally when you just said that, I'm thinking back to this conversation I had with Tim Collins. So, Tim, 5'7", mid-90s arm, pitching in the big leagues. And so Tim came up with the Blue Jays organization. He was drafted at 5'5", 130 pounds. And, obviously we filled him out and all that stuff. And he still goes on record as, when the Blue Jays adopted a lot of your methodologies as he was coming through the minor league systems, that was where Timmy surged. He was a, 80 to 82 arm, and combining what he did in the weight room and training wise with what he did throwing wise, that's what made him into a, low to mid 90s arm. And I'll never forget this conversation. In Double-A, things are very predictable, right? You're not going to throw 3 days in a row, and you're not going to throw 5 out of 7 days and all this stuff. But coming through the minor leagues, long tossing was very, very, important for him to understand, like, how to throw with intent and, have quantifiable feedback for your efforts. And when he got to the big leagues, he was probably 2 years in. And we were talking about, what you do in season throwing wise. And obviously guys aren't going 300 feet, like on, when they're throwing 4 to 5 days a week out of the pen and stuff, they modulate their effort. And I said to Tim, I was like, hey, how often do you throw like 300 feet nowadays? He goes, I do it every day. They just catch it at 60 feet. and it got me really thinking about like a lot of the interactions with our players over the year where, you talked like a Blake Trinan, which is an unbelievable arm. And, Blake doesn't take it out super far, but a long time ago he did. It was like almost like taking algebra before you go to calculus. Like, it's a box you have to check developmentally. Like, are you seeing that with kids? Like, it's, at 15, 16, 17, just learning to throw the ball farther. Is that just something that allows you to organize your body in positions to be successful?
Yeah. And I think also, I know this word's going to keep coming up. You'll probably get tired of it, but when, to me, the word intuitive and instinctive, I know they're very similar. Maybe they're basically saying the same thing, but let's face it, when you do anything in life, whether it's, running, lifting, stretching, meditation, and there is and I'm going to use the word visceral because I don't want this to seem like a small adjustment.
Yeah.
There's a major effect on you, and it's intuitive. You feel it, you know it. There's an aha moment. It just perpetuates itself. Obviously, it's intrinsic, it's self-motivating, and it's inspiring. So I think to answer your question is when we basically have a player that, let's say, hasn't done a lot of long toss or really doesn't know the nuances of it, and they just do it a few times, to me, the effect is dramatic. And I don't want to kind of be dramatic saying it, but to me, that's the bottom line. And when you've never gone, let's say, past 150, but you have 85 to 95 in your arm, and slowly you build into 250, 280, 300, maybe 350. Just as you said, a lot of things, that's the thing about long toss I love. There are so many nuances built in that once you experience it, it's sort of like you said, once you experience it, now you're dealing with a new normal. Your points of references now are completely shifted to where you've experienced that. Zito and Joel Zumaya are two guys that jump out at me right away. Zumaya was more of a 2-inning guy when he was with the Tigers, and for people nowadays, and we're already at a point where people are like, maybe Joel Zumaya is 15 years removed, but Joel at the time was the hardest thrower in the big leagues. He was up to 103 when 103 was like 120, and he got to a point where he was so comfortable with his long toss because he had lived it for 3 or 4 years that he needed to go to, now he was more of a 350, 370 guy in the off season. And I'm not suggesting if you throw 45 pitches in a game, the next day you got to 300 feet, but his arm was in such good shape. It was so well conditioned, and he checked the boxes, as you said, to where he essentially needed to get to about 300 feet every day. Some days more if he didn't throw as much the day before. But 300 feet maybe for the average person might be more like 220, 240. But my point is this: he lived it, he experienced it, and as you said, he was able to modulate or modify it according to what he needed. But I want to go back to the bottom line of what of your question, which is when you start experiencing new things in your body, when you go from a white belt to a black belt, it's a different world. And to me, I feel frustrated sometimes and saddened by players that have just never been exposed to, not that everybody has to go to 300 feet, everybody has to even long toss, but I think until you kind of go through that door and find out what happens when I expand and stretch out and create more range of motion and maybe tap into more things that are available, it's just hard to know what's there and what you may be missing.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, I think the other thing that, I look at from a long-term athletic development, even kind of like a motor learning standpoint is, you speak to range of motion is that, but by nature, the pitching delivery is, I think people get so caught up in that it has to be the exact same thing over and over again, right? We see, videos of pitch tunneling, and we see like the profile of like Yu Darvish throwing like 9 different pitches all coming out of the same tunnel. Like, you do the same thing over and over and over again. Like, your throwing program can actually be different than that. Like, you can add amplitude, range of motion, athleticism to your throwing program and be successful in different ways. We always hear about, the pitcher who gets the yips going and taking ground balls at shortstop and doing things like that. I think we a lot of times overlook that, being specific all the time is actually probably problematic for a lot of our guys. And lawn tossing is a way to be generally specific. It's a subtle deviation that, maybe taps into some of that athleticism that guys don't have when they're on the mound or just throwing flat grounds or something like that.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, on top of that, I use the word, I don't know if it makes perfect sense in a more biomechanic way, but I'm going to use a layman's terms word for me, which is variance.
Absolutely.
For me, I want the variance. Like, when I first started really getting involved with this and pushing long toss, and long toss has been around forever, but when I really start talking about this becoming the beneficial parts of throwing with arc uphill, gradually higher and higher and higher, and then eventually gradually lower and lower and lower, one of the pushbacks, of course, was, well, look, I got guys, I want to stay linear, I want them repeating, the same stuff you were just saying. And I said, look, I want variance. like, I know we all talk about from a
Yeah.
pitching point of view, how important repeatability is, but let's face it, and I'm going to steal a line from Butch Thompson, which I love. Butch says, I can't sign my own name twice in a row the same way. So to think that we're going to, quote unquote, repeat on a mound because we're throwing darts over and over in a linear way, and in what I would call a robotic way, I look at it the opposite way. I want to be organic. I want my athleticism freed up. I think that's why there's something called differential learning, right? I mean, the idea is that you're tapping into your natural intuitive movements, and those movements synchronize and organize themselves best when you're free. So to me, long toss is actually freeing up that part of you. And look, at the end of the day, for whatever degrees I go uphill and quote unquote come out of my mechanics, which I've tweeted this a number of times. We want guys coming out of their quote unquote mechanics, long tossing. For whatever degree I come out of my mechanics, let's say going 300 feet at 35 degrees uphill, I'm going to resync back to my mechanics when I get back into 60 feet or 65 feet, because 60 feet's too dangerous for most guys. The bottom line is I'm going to resync anyway. And I guess I'm going to come back to that word variance, man. I feel like variance is athleticism. It's feel. It's right brain versus left brain. And so anyway, I just wanted to echo on top of your statement about, I'm so into that with what you said about variance.
Yeah. And movement variability obviously has tremendous, impacts in terms of long-term health and sustainability and all that. But, I think the other thing is, on the whole, I think we underappreciate how much variance there actually is in the pitching delivery. And we had Ben Hansen from Modus on just a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that we talked about was that, if you put a Modus sleeve on guys and you have them throw a bullpen, you'd be shocked at how much, variance there is, and, varus torque, valgus stress on the elbow, how much external rotation takes place during a typical throw. Like, even on really like high level throwers, you'll see a lot of surprises, to the point that it's almost, made Modus change their business model from one of acute stress to one of looking at chronic workload management and building, tissue tolerance and stuff. So that's interesting. But I think, the other side to all this is I think on the whole, our industry has maybe underappreciated how moldable our athletes are, right? That, I have daughters, I have 3 kids under the age of 5, and they figure things out all the time, and they fall down from the jungle gym, they get back on, and 2 days later, they're perfect with it. And I think, like, we had a pitcher who literally just came in this week where his organization had told him, like, you can't possibly learn a cutter. It'll interfere with your sinker. I'm like, actually, there are a lot of guys that throw sinkers that are like Blake Treinen's got a sinker and a really good cutter too. Like, there are a lot of people that do it. Clearly it's possible. So we take these dramatic leaps of faith on assumptions. And you and I both know that there are a lot of assumptions that have made it hard for, long toss to change over the years. You know what I mean? So there's been resistance, and you've been at the forefront of the charge of fighting, the resistance against long toss. How is it, where was it 20 years ago? How has it changed over the course of time, and how do you see it now?
Okay, well, I just have to, sorry, but just I'm going to answer that.
Go wild, man. Go any direction you want.
No, just based on that last comment, as far as presumptuousness of, let's say, a major league organization or a college program or a high school program, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But to me, like you said, people are figuring stuff, especially nowadays with the internet and all the information out there. Kids are generally very, very educated, and coaches are very educated. Trainers are very educated. And I think that as a society or as a culture, I think the most important thing, and I met with an organization once, and one of the first things I told them is, all the kids you drafted this year, and I've brought this up now a number of times with organizations, of all the kids, every year when you draft your kids, I don't care if it's a first round pick or a 50th round, well, now it's 40th, but, or free agents or whatever, the first thing you should do is gather information, find out, not just about, throwing is obviously critically important to their development, but find out about their throwing habits, long toss, not long toss, distances, 5-day cycle, 7-day cycle. Do your homework on them. Find out what kind of training, strength and conditioning, weighted balls, not weighted balls, but, body blade, whatever's out there. Just do your research and then start to, and I know this is right up your alley, but then start to do the tweaking or the adapting if you need to, but to throw blanket programs on people, or to, as you said, just assume, almost like on a linear track, like that this is sort of the one size fits all program. And I'm not saying, and look, Major League, this is going to go to your question now. major league organizations, and again, we're talking about everybody out there, but specifically with major league organizations, I think they have made some of the greatest jumps, and I know you know this as well, in the last just year or two, 3, it's just been, you talk about encouraging and inspiring. I am so thrilled, like, with all of the changes they've made. So back to your question, the long toss from 20 years ago, I'm sorry, repeat it again.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of resistance were you facing 20 years ago? If you have, at the time, it was probably 28 organizations as opposed to 30 before expansion when you were getting going with this. But, what were some of the crazy things that you heard back in the day, and where are we at right now? Are things better?
Gotcha. And by the way, that one hurt, the pre 28 out of 30 pre-expansion draft, man. That day. No. Hey, in a way, actually, it makes me feel good because it gives me more years of experience, right?
Yeah. For what it's worth, like, I remember when the Nationals moved from Montreal to Washington, and when the Rockies and Marlins changed up. So I've been around a little bit too.
Well, I had a pitcher who was a 5th-year sign at a Lewis and Clark State named Steve Reed. He was never drafted. He went into his short season rookie ball year as a 23-year-old sidearmer. Started really doing well, was in the expansion draft of the Rockies. I think he went in the last round, which back then I think there were, it doesn't make sense, there were 3 rounds. Anyway, he was, but he got drafted. And when I talked to him, I was so excited he was going to get a big league opportunity. He was more excited about being drafted. I didn't realize that he had never been drafted before. And he went on to have about a 10, 12-year big league career. How about that for a cool story? That's 5th awesome. Year, senior sign. Look, man, the bottom line is this. I think if you asked me that question even 3-4 years ago, as we just talked about, I think my answer would not have been nearly as exciting as it is now. 20 years ago, as you said, I felt like it was 2 different languages. I felt like I was speaking one language, they were speaking another. I don't blame professional baseball. I think, as you know, just by default, you're looking at a system that's set up where there's a lot of people have to be on the same page. They have to have company policies, and I get that. So I don't want to make this seem like a negative on that. I think that's just part of life. But I do feel like the biggest frustration I had back then is that even if you don't have long toss as a company policy, please do your homework on each player, especially if they're guys that you feel like, coming in, like Zito, are doing things that are unique. Yep. But really for everybody, just do your homework on them and learn about them and find out why they're quote unquote an individual. Everybody has their own individual way of doing things in life. And so that was my biggest pushback, Eric, to be honest with you, is more than anything. It's just, please ask the questions, do your homework, do your research. You drafted them for a reason. And once you're there, and then maybe go to school on them. And then look, after a year, if something is broken or you want to, play with stuff. But you take someone as simple analogy as Trevor Bauer, because obviously people know Trevor is just so intensely into training and development. And I'm just going to use him as a simple analogy, but it would be sort of like drafting Trevor and then just saying, Trevor, here's our company program. This is our policy. This is what we have everybody do because we believe that this is what's going to keep you healthy and blah, 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 blah. And then everybody knows, and there's more Trevor Bauers out there now than ever, of course, just from a training point of view. But it would be sort of like taking Trevor and just saying, well, Trevor, sorry, we know you do this and that and this and that, but and to me, that was the biggest disconnect was just the inability for them to maybe have that awareness to at least check in with their players. But, it took a lot of work. There were plenty of people out there like yourself, Ron Woolforth, Brent Strom. I mean, there's a lot of people that have been pushing this hard for a lot of years. So luckily it's been a team effort, but, I think the main thing was writing articles. The main thing was meeting with any team that would meet with us, talking to any people in pro ball. 'Cause I felt like, as you know, in the amateur world, they're free to do whatever they want. And there's a lot more, ability to kind of adapt to whatever they want to adapt to. But I just felt like in pro ball, which all these kids eventually, if they're fortunate enough to get to, they're trickling up into pro ball. And to me, that should have been a space for them to continue to thrive and evolve based on what made them tick. So the good news is kind of long answer short is, long answer long is that, as you know, Eric, it's just things have changed radically in the last few years. They've been changing over the last 10 years, I'd say. But I just think what's happening now is that everybody is starting to get more and more educated by what's best for the player. Everybody's realizing now that each player goes to Cressey in the off season, or goes to Wolforth or Driveline, or does long toss, and now they're realizing that, wow, there's a lot of things out there. They're coming out of programs like Vanderbilt and Oregon State and UCLA and Auburn and what have you, and now they're realizing, wow, these kids are coming into pro ball incredibly educated, incredibly prepared, and I think wisely, as you know, professional baseball is proving that point, because now they're hiring a lot of college coaches. They're hiring people from Driveline. I'm sure you have sent more than your share of guys into pro ball that have worked on your staff. And to me, that's healthy. That's just a healthy thing. So anyway, that was a long one, man.
How many? I mean, if you know, obviously you have to name organizations, but if you know, out of the 30 organizations left, like how many do we have that are still stubbornly resisting, you know, long toss?
I would say, where maybe 5 years ago it was kind of a 10 great, 10 sort of you can work with it, and 10 pretty resistant. I'd say there's maybe one or two that to me are still pretty set on a firm number. One of those two I feel like is moving in the right direction. And I think there's maybe 4 or 6 that kind of, they're moving in the right direction. I still feel like there's, let's put it this way. I'd say other than a couple of teams that, and one in particular that I think are still pretty set on some numbers. I think everybody out there now, I think the cat is out of the bag, and I'm so relieved and grateful. And I think if of the 1 or 2 teams, I think even they're going to have to change, because it's starting to get, you know, I think to a point where you get overwhelmed by numbers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, not only that, I think sometimes, like, you know, certainly you pound the pavement, and, you know, I see you every year, you know, at area codes, and you talk to, you know, not just, you know, teams, but you're communicating directly with kids, with, you know, the coaching staffs, with advisors and agents and things like that. Like, pounding the pavement's been a big part of it. But I think also it's just like being patient. Like I never ceases to amaze me how, like, quickly the athletes we train become, you know, front office guys and scouts and college coaches. And, so all of a sudden, you know, these guys you're training 4 years ago are, you know, are assistant GMs and things like that. So it definitely, you know, I think that's been something that's been very, very helpful for getting it more accepted, is you have more of the, like, the young phenoms in front offices now who are in their early to mid 30s, who are really pushing to be progressive and make a difference. So it's great.
Yeah. And I'll just one name that just jumps out at me, that it's funny, because yes, I was thinking more along the lines of organizations changing and them hiring college guys. But the other thing is, as you said, we both have plenty of kids that we've trained in over the years that maybe played for X amount of years, and now they're becoming scouts, they're becoming agents, they're becoming front office people. And I'll tell you one of my favorite ones. I'm getting goosebumps because I just love this guy so much. But I was on a podcast with Max Weiner, which is I think it's the Ant Farm, right, in Florida. And so Max was just, you know, he was doing some private work down there. I think he was coaching at the local JC. And so we just had this great conversation. And then 2 years later, 1 year later, he was with an organization. And then 2 years later, I believe, he's the pitching coordinator, as you know, for the Mariners. And I think he's 23 or 24.
Yeah, I saw an article, I think 24. Yeah.
So I feel like, yes, what you just said is key, man, that the fact that it's almost like, I hate to use the internet generation, but, you know, it's almost like the kids that have really started to come out of this development, let's call it the developmental age, you know, where people are really hyper vigilant of what's going on. And I look, for every kid that's gone through our programs, your programs, Wolforth's programs, Driveline, Randy Sullivan, you can just bounce around the country, right?
Yeah.
You can feel it. They are spreading the word not only amongst their teammates, at the schools they go to, at the professional level, but yes, they are then graduating into positions in professional baseball, and that is such a great thing.
Absolutely. So, one question I actually, and this is probably an easy answer, is how do you actually define long toss? Because everyone has their own interpretation of what is actually long. Do you have the 15-second elevator pitch for it, or is that something that is a much more challenging discussion?
Well, it's definitely a 4-hour answer, but I'm going to give you the 15 sec. I'll give you the 15. You think the thing about you is, I'm not kidding, right?
Ready, go.
The 15-second version of it is long toss to me, I think is more, it speaks, I think, more to the end results. Meaning at some point we want to eventually stretch the arm out as far as you can, where you're in tune with your body. You're obviously not overexerting, but there's a stretch. Here's a 15-second answer. Long toss is about two main phases: stretching the arm out with angles uphill as you move away from your partner, and then eventually pulling down at angles, starting to progressively get lower and lower and lower and maintain the intent of your furthest throw. That to me is sort of long toss defined, but as you know, there's a lot of progressions that build up to it. Do you do that every day? Not necessarily, of course. And in some cases you don't do that every day. So, but I think that would be the most standardized answers. There's really two parts to it: the stretching out phase and the pull down phase, assuming that you're in shape to do it.
Awesome. So, one of the things that, when we had Ben Hansen on a couple weeks ago, he talked about kind of like his, both acute and chronic workload models. And he made a statement that, hey, if you shut an arm down for an extended period of time, it's 120 days to get ready for game action. it's a pretty big deal, right? We're looking at, basically 4 months to be ready to rock and roll. And, that's I think something that is very near and dear to you in the context of how a lot of like the rehab throwing protocols that are in place. That's something you're very, very passionate about, that you feel like a lot of times that, athletes aren't given the chance to build arm speed and stretch it out and do the things they need to do before they're, thrown on a mount to effectively test out the surgical repair. Talk a little about your experience with respect to rehab throwing programs and, what challenges that you see out there on the horizon right now.
Yeah, I mean, number one, I wrote an article maybe 10 years ago called The Origin of the 120-Foot Throwing Program. And I personally love the article from the point of view that I did more research on this than maybe anything I've ever done. I met with Dr. Yoakum in person, which was such a thrill. And what a great, gracious guy, to give me that much time, as busy as he was. I know I talked to you, talked to Dr. Marcus Elliott, I talked to Stan Conte, I talked to Tom House, I spoke through email with Greg Wilk. Is Greg Wilk, right? From ASMI?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Kevin Wilkes.
Kevin, sorry, Kevin.
Yeah.
Kevin Wilk, and the reason why I want to get to Kevin is I know that Kevin was part of the original group, that's with ASMI as far as incorporating. And so through this article, and through this research, I think I was trying to prove my instincts right, really more through the medical community and let them kind of give me the feedback of what I felt had happened. And what had happened essentially is that when the first Tommy John, I think, was 75 and the first shoulder reconstruction was 77, thereabout. And what Dr. Yoakum told me, which was profound, is that they brought in some doctors, some physical therapists, some athletic trainers, some baseball people, and I'm assuming they used a model similar to post knee surgery, something to do with a similar kind of surgery and those kind of protocols, and they came up essentially with a program that they thought made sense based on all the different diversified people in the room, which I think was genius. And so I feel, and Dr. Yoakum said that essentially, I believe he said that the James Andrews group at the time did something similar. They kind of came up with very similar protocols, and maybe they even exchanged notes. But bottom line is this: I think the rehab program, being 40 plus years old, I give them a lot of credit. I think they did a lot of smart things to be conservative and obviously allow the integrity of the elbow or shoulder or what have you to build into shape slowly, progressively, properly. So I don't have necessarily, look, you and I have talked about this. There's some things about even in those first 2 months that I don't know, like for sure, like, is that the right way? In other words, there's a certain amount of throws at a certain amount of distance, and then there's another increment. And I just don't know, like, if that's necessarily a perfect way. We've talked about things like if you make 10 throws at 45 feet and then 10 throws at 60 feet, why not use the 10 throws at 45 feet to get to 60 feet rather than 45, 10 throws there, stop, move out 15 feet, sort of maybe mini shock the arm. But I think the main piece that I'm most concerned about, and again, this is with complete respect to the medical community because I know that they've set up a good foundation.
Yeah, and we should put out, there's a difference between disagree and dislike. These are wonderful people that we may just have methodological differences, even though we agree on 98% of the stuff. So that's an important discussion to have.
Very important.
Yeah.
And also to note that, look, what we did 45 years ago in anything, look at technology 45 years ago. Look at making movies 45 years ago. So songwriting. So I think that we're not saying anything that's out of the ordinary. I think all we're just saying is that we're you and I have always both been about the highest good. That's all we care about. We just, we're totally diplomatic, Democrat, whatever. We want to make sure that, we're just getting to the highest good, whatever that needs to happen. And so I looked at I guess what I want people to hear most with the rehab is when you get to a point where you get to about 120 in the rehab program, and I'm essentially fine, more or less with it. In some programs it's 150, as you know, in some programs it's 180. But what happens is around the 120 mark, they start integrating mound work, which I'm fine because we both know that you also have to sort of, in a micro way, progressively, build that new, the introduction of the slope. And so I'm fine with introducing the mound work as just a baby steps, just like the first day of throwing, in rehab. My concern is these programs, the number usually stops around 120 to 180. And then at that point, remember, as you know, and look, I'm preaching to the choir, of course, but players for the most part I believe from the feedback I've gotten, they want the ball pretty linear. They want to stay in a certain mechanical form of integrity, which I get because we're taking care of, the elbow and we're making sure everything's moving the right way. That's fine. Do what you need to do. But at some point, instead of building up to full intent, onto the mound, once you get to this 120 to 180 magic number, my point is this: if you're good enough to start building up full intent on the mound, well, then you're good enough to start creating more range of motion. You're good enough to start creating more distance. And my big word is volume. I want, just like the program is conservative to start with, I still want that conservatism going. But the thing is, I don't want to stop being at 180 and then get into full intent mode on the mound. And even though they do that progressively too, and that's fine, the gap that I feel like is missing is, I basically say the end of the 180 program marks the beginning of the arm conditioning program. And whether you get out to 230 or 270 or 330, that's another 3 to 4 weeks. And so all I'm saying is that I want the athlete to now, before they get full intent off the mound, to start experiencing more angles. I want them to start using their legs, their core. I want them crow hopping. I want them getting athletic. I look at the first 6 to 8 weeks of rehab, and this is not a knock, but I feel like, visually, it's more robotic, it's more robotic movements. It's more linear. It's more mechanical. It's more technical. It's more left brain.
Yeah.
And I don't want that robotic sort of sense to then be taken onto the mound. I want that roboticness to be freed up, and let's get into the athlete, and let's take our time. Let's take, and look, we're talking about guys that are obviously, big enough and strong enough that they were, let's say, 250 to 350 pre-surgery. If we're talking about a 12-year-old,
it's different. 120
to 150 is probably perfect.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about an 18-year-old that was out to 330 pre-surgery, or a 21-year-old that was out to 350 pre-surgery or 300 pre-surgery, I'm not even saying you have to go out that far. Glenn Fleisig told me a while ago, he said, look, there is some data on the time right after surgery and the relationship with the elbow and throwing the ball with arc. And I don't know if that goes back to an older study, but so I've been sensitive to telling guys, look, you don't need to go from 180 to 330 in 4 weeks. Maybe it's 280, maybe it's 300, but whatever it is, I want the volume. I want the conditioning, and I want the athleticism back in the athlete prior to getting fully intent on the mound. So that is my main piece that I wanted to get out.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I think it comes back to the goals are going to be different for different people, right? The surgeon, he wants to, above all else, protect and then test out his repair. Like those are the
Sure.
priorities. A surgeon is really not gung-ho about making sure that you return to your previous level of performance. That's a long-term concern, but in the short term, it isn't. And one of the things that I talk to a lot about our athlete, and I don't even know if we've ever talked about this. This is kind of an interesting one. Is like, so think about the common scenario, right? The initial injury takes place, right? So let's assume it's a Tommy John, right? So the athlete waits a couple weeks or a month to get the surgery, and then he waits 4 months to start throwing. So effectively, he's been on the shelf for 5 months. The throwing program is very conservative, right? Most don't reach full intensity off the mound until about the 5-month mark. So you're looking at 10 months of throwing without being at full intensity, and it can be even longer if you have an athlete that was like initially mismanaged and they had like an attempt at like a conservative treatment that they wind up having to have surgery. So you're looking at maybe 10 to 12 months where you really haven't trained much. Now, what people don't realize is that throwing off a mound is a power exercise, and it's a very specific one at that. We know that, power is plane specific. Just because you have a great vertical jump doesn't mean you're going to be able to throw a baseball a long way. But the bigger thing that a lot of people, I think, in the medical community don't appreciate, I definitely don't think people even understand it in the baseball world, is that if you look at the different fitness qualities that we have, power is the thing that falls off the fastest, right? Aerobic fitness, maximal strength, those things stick around really easy. Like you can train them once a month and they'll hover. Power is going to fall off in like 5 to 7 days. And there's some really good writings, out there in different contexts on this. But, so you can't be surprised if you do a conservative throwing program and your velocity is not there at the 10-month mark. And the problem is, like, we assume a lot of times that we see, Steven Strasburg coming back at 11 months throwing absolute fuel and everything being great, or like Lance Lynn, I think, came back at like 9.5 or 10 months. Like he was really, really early. And a lot of times those are just guys that had, and I don't know the backstories on a lot of them, but you never know if they ever did much arm care beforehand. Maybe they got into the weight room a ton. They did stuff entirely different. So you have to be really careful about comparing yourselves and just assuming that you're magically going to come back throwing absolute fuel. So I think there's something to be said for, like, you need to really get after it on your return to throwing programs. They can't just be follow it and hope the velocity will magically be there when you need to let it eat. Like, some guys need to be free to long toss further. Others might benefit from doing some weighted ball stuff. We have more organizations that are doing that early on. Some guys may need to be on the mound earlier so they can adjust to the slope, particularly if they have like a mechanical history. They didn't all build velocity the same way, so they're not going to regain it the same way either,
That's a Cresseyism, man. That's powerful.
Yeah.
No, and sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I think for me, and I definitely defer to you on this, like, one of the things I'm always stunned at is when we have the conversations with pro guys. I literally had it yesterday with a kid in AA who came in for an evaluation, and he's like, yeah, I'm like 90 to 92. When I was in college, I was 3 to 5 though. I was like, all right, let's look at what you did in college. And invariably we lifted heavy stuff and I threw the ball farther, and now I'm an organization and we do like, body weight circuits in our weight room, and we don't long toss. And I'm like, this is not rocket science. This is getting back to, what you did when you were really successful in many cases. Do you see that a lot?
I do. And I would go back to something we talked about earlier, whether it's pro ball, college, high school, travel ball teams. If you're a player and you go anywhere, the most important thing, if you really want to find out that, I think that if you're in someone that's going to help promote and support, your development, the first thing they should do is they should do a background eval on you. They should look, it's something I said obviously earlier about one of the organizations that when we met with them, I don't want to put this out on people like this, because sometimes if you just don't know what you don't know, I get it. So I don't want to make this sound like, again, everybody should know this. But look, at the end of the day, I go back to my first lessons I did as a pitching coach 25 years ago or 30 years ago. And I wanted to watch them the first day they threw. I had ideas about what they should look like mechanically, which I probably would disagree. No, I'm just kidding. But, I had ideas about what they should do or shouldn't do, or how they should long toss or not long toss. But I owed it to the kid, and to watch and observe and take in and ask questions. And why do you do this? And why do you do that? And why do you like this? And why don't you like that? And I feel like among the bullet points I hope people take away from this conversation, Eric, as much as anything, whether it's a professional whether it's a farm director, pitching coordinator, hitting coordinator, high school coach, it doesn't matter. Especially if a kid comes in and you can tell is well prepared, is well trained, is nuanced. The first thing to do is find out what makes them tick, find out what has made them great. And yes, at some point we want to add to that if possible, or tweak or adapt. But I would say more kids than not are going into high school, college, and professional baseball incredibly advanced, incredibly in tune with their bodies and knowing their programs and knowing what makes them tick. And so I think that, to me, it's almost, I'd call it irresponsible for you as an organization or as a college program or coach to not do the background check on them and not be interested and open to wanting to. I mean, that's the other thing. You would want to adapt to them, especially if they prove to you that they're very advanced. And so I just hope that's one of the big takeaways from this conversation. It goes back to this word that you and we've talked about forever, which is individuality. I mean, everybody is different. So why would we plug in formulas, even if we think the formula is good? I've said, look, for someone who loves long toss as much as I do, I've said this a million times and I'll still say it. I'm not saying everybody has to long toss. I think for the most part, you taught me a word. I quote you, by the way. I give you props all the time on this when I use this word. There are kids that are hyper mobile or hyper flexible, a term I got from you. And that long toss may not be good for them. And so I get that, but I feel like I will strongly share my opinions at some point in the most non-threatening, non-passive aggressive way. I feel like that's important because I have 29 years of experience. But at the same time, I've got to do my homework. And I just feel like, as you said, Eric, it's one of the most frustrating things I've ever dealt with in the training world is having players go to, whether it's a high school, college, again, or pro ball. And they've been doing something that is absolutely rolling for them. And they have growing in leaps and bounds. And then they hit a freaking stop sign. And someone comes in and says, here is our plan. And we don't do this and we do that and we don't do this and we do that. And meanwhile, the kid's like, well, wait a minute. I do this and I do that. I do this and I do that. And now you have the kid that you just talked about. And that to me has been one of the most consistent issues I have dealt with in 29 years is exactly what you just said, is players that let's say they go to a high school, they roll. And it doesn't happen really anymore in colleges because I think the colleges to me are just, they're rolling. But they go to college and then they get sort of told what to do. Nowadays, I feel like the colleges are for the most part just unbelievably from a training perspective. The colleges you go to, again, we'll just throw a Vandy out there, Auburn, UCLA, whatever. You go to one of these programs, you're rolling. My goodness, if I draft you, what's the first thing I got to do? I've got to know, man, why did I take you in the first round or the 8th round or the 32nd round? It doesn't matter. I drafted you. And last thing, by the way, while I'm on my soapbox, and I was talking to a coach in an organization I won't mention, but I've had this talk with Scott Brown, with Nate Yeske, with Butch Thompson, and I've asked those guys because these guys are churning out pitchers year after year after year, and I've asked them, Derek Johnson, who I know you know well, I've asked this to Derek. How many scouts have talked to you pre-draft to not just to get to know the player personality, but to get to know the depths of their throwing, of their weighted balls, of whatever, of their long toss? You're with them every day for 3 years, basically. I think you know them well. Now, here's part 2. Now, this is where my buddy who's in one of the organizations, he's in the player development side. Here's the flip side to it. Now you've drafted Walker Buehler, right? So now, which the Dodgers do, now what are you going to do from the player development side to reach out to the pitching coach of the high school, of the college that this kid just spent 3 or 4 years there every day to do your bonus work just in case the area scout or the scouting director didn't get it all right? Even if they got it all right, there's a lot more there, I'm sure, from the pitching coach. Why would you not call? Yeah. You do this for the hitters too, but why would you not? And so very few pitching coaches that I know, especially post-draft, have been called to. Scott Brown told me 2 organizations have followed up with him since he's been at Vandy, and one of them does it every year. And well, I've already gave one of them away, the Dodgers. But with Yeske, I don't know if he's had anybody call him post-draft. Now, he was the pitching coach of the year, and he was probably number 2 pitching coach of the year, a year ago. And I'm just thinking, look, let's just try to play this as objective as possible. Mm-hmm. Let's just say you and I are GMs.
Yeah.
And we know what we know about training and development and adaptability and individuality. So now we draft 40 guys this year and sign whoever free agents. What's the first thing that we're going to do once we draft that player? We're going to talk to them, find out what makes them tick. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to call a few people. I know we only have so much time, but if you've only drafted 20 pitchers this year, that's not that much work, and you can delegate, right? If you're the GM. And so I'm going to, you trained at Cressey Performance for the last, not 3 months, but for the last 5 years you've been with Eric? Mm-hmm. Huh. I should probably call Eric. Now, actually, let me, you've been doing this long toss program, or you've been down at the ranch for the last 2.5 years. And wow, it's kind of what they did with Zimmer, right? With the Royals and Kyle, right? It's like, well, Zimmer went to Driveline, had incredible success, and now they brought in Kyle as a consultant or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to throw it to you, right? How many times, and you don't have to say this if you're not comfortable. Yeah. How many major league organizations, and not even how many organizations, but how many times have you been contacted? You have probably put in, I'm going to put a very conservative estimate of 500 kids into professional baseball. I'm sorry if that undercuts you.
But no, it does not happen often. What I would say is that what does happen, we're fortunate. We have really good relationships with a lot of the area scouts. So they do their homework beforehand, in terms of getting to know the kid and all that, which everybody does. But we both know that, unfortunately, a lot of those area scouts information doesn't get disseminated to the people that matter, because we both know that in most organizations, scouting and player development are markedly different. So no, we don't get a lot. We are getting more people who will check in on players who are training with us in the off season, where, a minor league pitching coordinator, or even like an assistant GM, somebody like that will come and visit, particularly if it's a highly ranking prospect. So I'd say the check-ins are more prevalent than they used to be. I'm also, I'm cognizant of, as shocking as it is, I know that, on the sports medicine and strength and conditioning side of things, most major league organizations are actually woefully understaffed. And so that's, certainly we get questions on the skill development side of things relating to long toss and mound work and pitch selection, all that. But, certainly like on a strength and conditioning, side of things, if you go to the NBA, you go to a roster, you've got, 1 to 3 or 4, coach to player ratio, whereas in baseball, it might be 1 to 15 or 20. So the numbers, I'm sure, push a lot of that out. So, it's an incredibly valid point, but I think it's also somewhat of a broken system that needs to be changed in a lot of other ways too, to accommodate like those important discussions that we both know need to happen.
Okay. Right. Okay. I get what you're saying about that, but let me throw this out there. Mm-hmm. You draft 40 kids a year. Yep. And there's some free agents and what have you. And I respect the fact that, yes, they may be understaffed. Yep. But then I'm going to throw this angle out there. How much time, energy, and money are they putting in analytics?
I agree.
To win games? How much time and energy and money are they putting into international scouting? How much time and energy? First of all, if you sign one player like a Mike Trout for $35 million, and you might have 5 Mike Trouts in that draft, every kid might have a possibility to be a number 1 star in the big leagues or an all-star. So
it's a broken model. They view it in silos. That's the problem. They don't understand that money's money, and there's plenty of it to go around in professional baseball. It's just a matter of whether you choose to put it into player development, whether you choose to put it into scouting, whether you choose to put it into big league, contracts, whatever it may be.
I know, but you have, I get that, but you have these finished, let's say finished products for the college kids, especially. Mm-hmm. I guess what I keep coming back to is that it's like 95% of the job is done. Yeah. Now you're putting the icing on the cake. So there's not that much work to do. So if I hired one guy and paid him $100,000 a year and said, here's your job. After the draft, I want you to do recon on every single player we drafted. I want you to reach out to their pitching coach, talk to the player, the family, find out the 3 closest people in that person's life, whether it's training, whether it's personality. Mm-hmm. But let's, just because we're talking about training today, let's make sure, because the personality is a whole other animal that they deal with too. But let's just find out those things that are part of, that make him tick from a training perspective. That data, to me, you talk about analytics in this day and age, and we're sinking forget the money on analytics. How about the time and energy we're putting in analytics? And you're saying that we can't find a fraction of the time that they put into analytics?
Yeah, it's
into
amazing.
Just doing a simple background on each kid you draft each year, to me. And this guy who's in this organization, by the way, they're going to have a meeting about it, and I'm assuming they're going to start doing it, and they're going to have a major competitive advantage over all the other clubs that aren't doing this, which to me is most of them.
Yep.
Because to me, maybe this is just one of those things that you don't know what you don't know, but it's going to come out, and at some point, I think your inbox is going to get flooded because of this.
Yeah. And here's the other thing too and you and I both know this. What's the single biggest type of personality that we worry about going into pro ball? It's the guy who's always smiling, who is super polite and is terrified of confrontation, and he gets chewed up and spit out in pro ball. Like we've seen guys go in the first round where they're 4-seam curveball changeup guys, and within 6 weeks they're 2-seam slider cutters. Like it's overhauling. I've had this conversation with a lot of guys, not just in baseball, but in life. Like one of the most important qualities you can ever learn is how to tactfully say screw off, no, thank you. And it's hard because you want to be a good employee and you've been taught to be a great teammate and a great soldier. And, you're trying to make friends in a new organization, but there are some pretty aggressive overhauls that I've seen. It doesn't happen, I'd say, as much now as it did 5 years ago, but these are really, really important things.
Well, also, and I'll say the last point just the last comment is this. Mm-hmm. I tell players, look, because I'm easygoing, I'm non-confrontational, I'm more conversational, and just let's get to the highest good. Mm-hmm. But I have told players, and I always say, do this in a nice way, do it in a diplomatic way. But look, you have two choices. One, you stand your ground and you trust your truth, because your truth knows what makes you tick. Mm-hmm. And you might ruffle some feathers, but you have a chance to have a 15 to 20 year big league career. So that's option A. Option B is that you fit in, you don't ruffle feathers, as you said, you don't bring this up, you hope it all works out, I'll kind of work through the system, and you're out of baseball, and not for sure, but maybe you're out of baseball in 3 years. I'm like, if you look back 3 years from now, which guy did you wish you were? Mm-hmm. And we both know many, many players that look back on their career, and if they could do it all over again, it is a no-brainer. They would flat out say, not in a rude way, they would flat out say, look, this is my program. This is what works for me. I'll listen. If something feels right, I can tweak a little bit, no problem. But my foundation is in place and it is strong. Yeah. And end of story. And yeah, you're right. It's one of those things where kids got to know. And the last thing I got to say on it is that unfortunately kids that go into the draft, especially, I guess the same applies to college baseball. They're assuming that they're going to be left alone. They're assuming that, no one's going to come around and basically force things on you and take things away. So they're kind of caught off guard, unfortunately. And then there's the authority figure factor, right? Mm-hmm. And now you're sort of like, now you don't know what to say or what to do, but you got to, so maybe part of this takeaway I hope people get from this too is that be prepared, whether it's high school, college, travel ball, professional baseball. Be prepared to stand your ground.
Yeah, that's super important feedback. So we've talked a lot about, we kind of trended in the direction of like the rehab programs. We talked about the pro side of things. Let's talk about the advice that matters for, the 17-year-old and his dad that are listening to this. And we found that that's actually been some of like our biggest demographic. I never expected how many kids would be listening to like this with, with their parents. Actually, Pete Mackey from the Twins sent me a text that they were driving from Cedar Rapids to Minnesota with some of the minor league prospects for the Twins, and they were like listening to it in the van together. So, for those guys, right? So you obviously have these two distinct phases of long toss. When you break it down, there's the stretching it out and there's pulling it down. Give us some of the biggest mistakes for each of those phases. Like, what do you see on the taking it out, and what do you say on the pulling it down that drive you crazy, and you want to put out there for people to not make those mistakes?
Well, the main mistake is rushing into shape. Mm-hmm. Two things before I get to the actual long toss itself. One is maybe not deloading from the season properly, mm-hmm. not knowing the difference between rest and active rest. Mm-hmm. But regardless, once you get to throwing, no matter what you've done, and that's a whole other topic, obviously, the other things I just said, but you, generally speaking, just assume it's going to be 4 weeks to get yourself into great shape, assuming you're throwing at least 4 to 5 days a week. So number one is just to not rush. That's the, that's the conservative part of how we teach this. Number two, no aggressive throwing, no linear throwing, and no mound work until you've got to your furthest distance. So the question comes up all the time, well, if I'm only out to 200 feet in week 2, does that mean I just stop and walk in? And I'm like, no. You can look, if you use 50% intent to get to 200 feet or 60%, you can still maintain 60% intent on the way back in and lower the ball. To me, you're still stretching the arm out. You're not pulling down. You're getting a little linear. That's fine. But the main point is this. First, get the arm, what we call fully opened up, fully stretched out. Another line I love is build volume over distance. So the distance will come, focus on the volume, the endurance. You're going to recover better, obviously, as you know. And so those are some of the, I think, the really key points. And then the first day you pull down, so let's say 300 feet is your max distance. I actually tell guys, it shouldn't be one throw at 300 feet. I want you to be able to make 8 to 10. So that might take another 2 or 3 sessions. So to me, the pull down phase starts, the real aggressive phase starts once you've got to your max distance comfortably and you're able to stay out there comfortably for, let's say, 5 to 10 throws. And then the first day you pull down, I actually tell guys the first 2 or 3 days of pulling down, just like long toss, do that progressively. So maybe pull down 80% on your first pull down day, right? Maybe the next day you go out to 180 is more of a lighter stretch out day. Then the next day you're going to get after it again and pull down maybe 90% on that day. So I think that would be another takeaway. Maybe one last takeaway would be, as you start incorporating your pull down phase, go Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Don't go back to back days. As you know, everything's incremental. Within the long toss itself, the things that, bother me the most is guys, and this was a video I love that you posted, was it Scherzer and another guy?
Yeah, he and Trevor Gott were out there letting it eat.
Yeah, but the point of your post, which to me made me smile so much, is notice how on the way out, there's what we call effortlessness. I call it massage. Let the arm stretch, let it be relaxed, let it be loose. That's why we like the ball uphill with angle. It's symbolically to the brain, metaphorically to the body. It frees you up. So what gets me is we see players come out of the get-go throwing the ball, maybe not full intent, but they're throwing the ball in a line with some firmness. And we want that obviously at the end. So that's the first habit I think we try to really break with players, is like, hey, let's just breathe. Let's relax. What does a quarterback look like when he's throwing a screen pass over the line? That's sort of how we want the first few minutes of throws to look, especially. And so that's number one, is to keep that relaxation, that freedom from the get-go, and then stay with that all the way out. And then the other big, I think, thing that we notice is when guys do get to the pull-down phase is they think they're pulling down well, but they tend to decelerate, and it's still okay because they're getting some firmness behind the ball. But the true test to me of a guy learning to take that extension phase into that explosive phase properly and ideally is, are you able to maintain the intent? Are you able to not, in other words, guys will decelerate on the way back into their throwing partner. A, they don't want to throw over the guy's head. B, they don't want it to look bad because, it's over the guy's head, or they have to play chase. They're wasting time. So we have our players, we really give them a couple of simple, focal points. One is to miss low no matter what. We have guys aim 20, 30 feet in front of their throwing partner if need be. But to me, I think those are some of the things within the long toss that we find that we troubleshoot a lot.
That's awesome. Where do you feel like, those are certainly technical cues. Where do you feel like people make the biggest mistakes from like a programming standpoint? Like, I know, you've talked about, like, whether we're talking about the rehab throwing programs, like getting to the mound too quickly. What are the other ones that you see as big snafus that people, run into?
I think the main ones really is just trying to get into shape too fast is really the biggest one. Not building the volume and building the stretching and the length prior to aggressiveness. Obviously, obviously that would fall in the same hands of getting on a, I mean, maybe I guess another one would be just getting on a mound prior to 3 to 4 weeks of fully stretching out, maybe a week or two of really good pull downs. So you're 6 weeks in. Okay, now you can get on the mound.
Yeah.
So maybe getting on the mound too soon, that goes back to the rehab point, of course, which is, yeah, get on the mound when they say to get on the mound, because you're incrementally getting used to the slope, and you're doing that with very low impact, and that's fine. But don't, again, get into full intent on the mound without starting to first get your throwing program back up to speed of where it should be. And that 3 to 4 week gap that I mentioned earlier that I think is missed. But no, listen, I think the only other thing is maybe I think some guys might, leading into their first throwing, I don't think maybe are as aware of active rest, a term straight from Eric Cressey. I feel like, I don't know the proof of this or the data. I only know what makes sense to me, but I tell guys, look, no more than 3 weeks into your first day of throwing, maybe more like 4 weeks, start doing some light band work, right? Start doing some things that Cressey Performance would put out there. Start moving the body, and then maybe the third week leading up to it, maybe increase the reps or increase the days of doing the band work. And then I'm big on the forward throwing motion with the band work. So maybe as you get closer and closer to day one of throwing, you've really upped the reps, obviously still all in a conservative way, but you've done a lot of band work, a lot of range of motion stuff, so that on day one of throwing, you got a base in place. So that to me is another one of those, I think, nuances about, especially talking about the 17-year-old and then, can I throw one last one out there while we're on it?
Yeah.
To me, the stopping and starting.
Yeah.
And this is to me something that we both deal with all the time, and it comes up all the time. I have no problem with a kid having a long high school season, even a pitcher that has a long college season into summer ball. You know what? Just keep going. Obviously, monitor yourself. Hopefully, your workload is not abnormal in the summer. But just at some point, let's say August, okay, now start to deload, start your rest period, plot your active rest building into your cycle to start your throwing program again. And as we both know, unfortunately, there are so many things out there, and I'm not blaming the showcases, but there are just so many options with showcases and travel ball and fall ball and scout ball. And we both know there's so many options out there. And to me, and this is again right up your alley, plot your plan, right? Yep. Get your plan, set it up. I don't mind guys going along. We're probably way more, as conservative as we are in a lot of ways. I think we're very liberal when it comes to, as long as you're on a program and you're consistent and you're throwing a lot and you're religious, go for it. Go from, there's a reason why professional guys have a long season and go down and pitch in winter ball for 3 months. I'm not saying that's for everybody, but guys get away with it. And I've heard professional guys say, I took the winter off, did hardly anything to rest my arm, and then I did some stuff, and then I got ready for spring training, and then my arm didn't feel great spring training. I've had other guys say, I pitched through all the way through the winter leagues down in the Puerto Rico or somewhere. I had only 4 weeks off, which I'm not recommending. I know you're not either, but they've said I've never felt more alive in spring training. And so I guess my point is this: everybody's different.
Yeah.
I would just say, regardless of whether you go through these longer bouts or not, the bottom line is this: stopping and starting is so dangerous.
Yes.
And I would just say, go on the wave, take the wave, stay consistent, keep the continuity going. If you decide you're ready to shut down and deload, plot that out. But don't take off 3 weeks and say, well, I'm only taking off 3 weeks and then I have a week to kind of rebuild and then I'm going to throw in the showcase. We both know it's just danger waiting to happen. And I think that for parents that are listening to this, as much as your kid is dying to pitch in that showcase or that one, and all the scouts are going to be there and all the college recruiters are going to be there, pick your spots and just know that there's a time to roll with your training and your in season. There's a time to deload. There's a time to rest, recover, rebuild, and then prep for your in season again. And it's like one long wave into the wave sort of petering out, and then build the wave up again. And so to me, it's like a flow of the ocean versus, man, you and I both have had to deal with this, where you have a kid who's at the end of his high school season, and he's in perfect shape for a deload, rest, active rest, rebuild.
Yeah.
And then somewhere 2.5 months down the road,
the phone rings and they decide yep.
It's this huge tournament.
Yep.
And then he's got like only 2 months on the back end where he had 3 months or 4 months to really set up his next February or March. And that is just a killer.
Yeah. It should be gradual on-ramps. It should be build-ups, like you said, not spikes. And that's something Ben talked about a couple weeks ago as well, is that, you have to look at both acute and chronic workloads. Like sometimes the worst thing you do is take 2 weeks off and then go out and throw a full tilt bullpen, puts you in a really bad place where you'd be better off just playing catch straight through and, so that your workload is at least a little bit more consistent. So that, what about, within the week, like your 5 and your 7 day models? Where do you stand on some of those?
To me, it's one of my favorite things to talk about because I feel like I've had a lot of, I don't want to say trial and error. I've had a lot of discussions with players. I've sort of like with long toss, I've always built it based on my feel and my experience. And it seems like it has worked so well with the guys. Let's start with the simplest one, the 5 day. I think in professional baseball, this is changing now, but because of the old 4-man rotation,
yep.
I guess one of my biggest concerns really is a lot of organizations had guys pending on day 2. Day 2 meaning if your start day is on Sunday, then your side day would be on Tuesday. And for me, and this I go into scoring detail, I think in articles, and I think it's in it's definitely in the manual. But the bottom line is this: your job from Sunday, if you have a 5 day rotation, as you know, is to be pristine in 5 days. And to me, the best way to be pristine in 5 days is to give yourself 2 days to recover, rest, and rebuild so that on day 3, which for Sunday would be now Wednesday, you can throw your side. I realize you only have one less day to your start day, but I don't want a guy limping into day 2, which is your most sore day anyway, and throwing on a sore body. And then now we're really limping Wednesday, Thursday into the start. So for 5 days, I like day 3 as the side day. So really what'll happen, I'll give you very, very simple numbers. Everybody's different, but if you're a 300-foot guy, which is a simple number in pro ball, I would say that, your start day is one of your best long toss days. Ironically, in season, you're fully stretched out. You can pull down maybe less because you're going to get intent in the pen and intent on the mound. So, but stretch it out more or less completely on your start day. The day after, whereas you get this question all the time. Yep. People are like, should I take it off? Should I go light? Well, if you're in great shape and you have a great base and you're used to 300 feet, I'm going to say if you didn't throw more than 100 pitches, let's say you threw 70 to 95, you're probably going to need 150 to 180 to stretch it out. I mean, we're talking 25% effort with low impact, range of motion, blood flow, all that good stuff. Now you're setting up day 2. Day 2 to me, guys are going to start pushing 250, 280, maybe even 300, but there's no pull downs on either of those 2 days. And now you've really set up day 3. Now day 3, you're fresh. You can get full distance if you want. You can even get some pull downs in. I would actually be the guy, especially June, July, and August, to start telling professional guys on your pen days is to get on the mound, but maybe back off the intent. Mm-hmm. Trust that on day 5, your accuracy is going to be just fine, but we want to keep you fresh and strong, especially as the season goes on. So day 3 actually is their best long toss day for me in season. Day 4 is optional. I tell guys, do whatever you want. I'd recommend probably 90 to 120 feet. Day 5 again is your more of your big long toss day. Again, minimal pull down. So it's sort of like your day 1, 3, and 5 are sort of your stretch out days. Mm-hmm. The other days are just recover, rebuild. 7 day. I don't know if you wanted to comment real fast on that, 'cause I know you have great insight as well.
I personally, I'm always very reluctant to mess with guys if they're really resigned to like, I'm a day 2 guy or a day 3 guy. I think that's kind of like a sacred part of the rotation and we work around it. What I will say, I like a lot about the day 3 bullpen. I like the fact that it shortens the learning loop. If you're working on something, I'd rather, have you work on it 48 hours out from a start as opposed to 72 hours out. So it's, it's an opportunity to have that feel persist over a couple of days. And that's why you even see some guys like who will throw like a short, basically bullpen on day 4, even, just from a feel standpoint.
Sure.
And I think the second aspect of it is if you look at like a high-low model, obviously the day of your start, day 0, is a very high-stress day. And we know a lot of guys that love to get in a really good lift on day 1. They push it pretty hard because they can consolidate it. So what you realize is if you've started and then had a huge lift on day 1, you've dug your recovery hole really deep. You've beaten yourself up pretty bad. And I don't love the idea of throwing a bullpen right on top of that. So for me, if a guy's a big day 1 lift day, I try to find a lot of recovery on day 2, and then we consolidate stress with their second lift and their bullpen on day 3. And then they have day 4 to basically, like you said, it's a field day. It's whatever they want. Maybe they play catch at 60 feet. Maybe they just, sprint a little bit in the outfield, whatever it is. But it fits right into a high-low model. A day 2 bullpen makes that more challenging. You have to be creative. You got to talk to guys about maybe lifting post game on the day of her start, or their day 2 just tends to go really, really long. So there's all these different ways we can attack it, but I tend to agree with you. I'm a fan of the day 3 pen whenever possible. What about your 7-day rotation? Because I love a 7-day because you can get some good work in.
You can, and you get creative.
Yeah, so let's say you've got a Friday starter, who's at a mid-major that really wants to take a step forward. He's 88 to 90, and he wants to be 92 to 94. What are you doing with him after his Friday start over the week?
Perfect. And by the way, just one note on what you said. I'm giving these, obviously suggestions but if a player, like if I'm talking to a pitcher and he's like, look, I just love my day 2. It works for me. I'm going to say the same thing. I'm going to say, hey, great. It works for you. You might try this. And by the way, every pitcher I've tried this with, I believe, has noticed a noticeable change for the better going to day 3 from day 2. So that's also why I'm feel so strongly about this. But I learned something from you too about the lift part of this, how it's beneficial from that perspective as well. On the 7-day is more creative because it's way more luxury because now you can space out your recovery, you can rebuild slower, you can really optimize your long toss days, as you know. And so what I try to do is keep more of a model of like this. Basically, your start day being on, you said Friday, so we'll start with Friday. So you're a Friday night guy, again, 300 feet being a norm. Let's say you go out to 300 feet, just completely stretch it out. And by the way, one other note on that, people will say, well, isn't that kind of far to go? Isn't that a lot of throwing the day of your start? And my response to that is always this. If you are in great shape to begin with, meaning this is normal for you, then it's normal A. B, why would you not stretch your arm out to full range of motion prior to explosiveness anyway? So even if you think you're throwing too much, it's sort of like taking a car and saying, well, my Ferrari in 5th gear really flies, but I want to go into 3rd gear a little bit and save the engine a little bit for my drive. And you're like, well, no, I got to get to 5th gear to open the engine up, right? So that's it's an important point because it's a point obviously that comes up quite a bit with people about, should you throw that much? There's a reason why Zito, Bauer, Heron, some of the guys that, we've done work with, I know those are 3 guys, but to me, it's become more of the norm. I mean, the Oregon States, the Vanderbilts, some of the programs that, I'm not even, I can't speak for Scott for sure, but I know like some of the teams that I've done a lot of work with, it's just normal to see a guy pretty much fully stretched out before the game. So day 1, pretty much fully stretch it out. Pull downs are sort of on you. I always recommend guys at least get some really good pull down intents, at least from about 100, 120 feet in. Crow hop through all this, which we haven't talked much about, always using the legs. Day 2 to me is same thing. Let's say you threw 90 pitches. So, I think in the manual I put 90 to 180. Zito, after his start, would get out to 300 feet. He was so well trained and conditioned, and I believe Bauer does the same. He gets out far the next day. It's not like overloading. It feels good to fully stretch it out because his arm is conditioned to do it. But I'd say to be conservative, 90 to 180 the day after. The second day now, I back guys off a little bit more too because I feel like we have an extra day before the pen. So now day 2 might be 250, 280, fully stretching it out. The problem is the better shape a guy is in, the more he's going to want to start getting to his max distance on day 2 anyway. So let's just say day 2 is 300 feet, no pull downs. Now, day 3 and 4 are interesting because you can actually pen on day 3 and give yourself an extra day on the back end before your start. Or you can use day 3 as another good conditioning day, as you said, a field day.
Yep.
Start to get your pull downs going, but really set up day 4. So now you're really optimizing the break or the gap into your pen. Maybe now, so on day 4, now you're getting what I call beast mode. You're getting a full long toss in, a full pull down in. Your bullpen to me is the icing on the cake. Do what you need to do. Now you have 2 days to play with. So now day 5 might be, let's say, 180, 200 stretch out. Day 6 is optional. Again, 90 to 180 feet. Now day 7, you've had 2 days from your pen to really feel fresh and have a great long toss. And so to me, I just look at it like, as obviously as you know, a critical word here is endurance and longevity. To me, this is how you get stronger through the season, by having these gaps and this kind of a rhythm.
Absolutely. And that 7 versus 5 day is a game changer. I mean, you and I both have had the conversations with, basically high school and college guys where, it's an adjustment going from a 7-day rotation to a 5. 5, it's all about making sure you're ready to go on day 5. When you got 7, you're looking at development. So it's a paradigm shift for sure. This has been awesome.
Yeah. And I'm sorry. One thing too, cause you just stimulated a great point, which is it's another reason why, and I hope some professional teams are listening to this. It's another reason why you want at least the first couple of years to make sure you have your guys pen on day 3, because they're used to a gap between their start day and their pen day. Mm-hmm. And so when they go into pro ball and we're already squeezing them by putting them on a 5 day, they maybe more than anybody else need that extra day because it's closer to the rhythm of what they did in college. And to have them penning on day 2 when they're used to having gaps, to me is, it even amplifies to me the problem even more of the lack of recovery, and getting on the mound. And also, what does a pitcher do? When you get them on a mound, even if you say, well, day 2, we can go a little lighter and whatever. And well, we both know that when a pitcher gets on a mound, unconsciously, you're going to probably get a little competitive unless you're a 10-year veteran. You're going to get a little competitive. There are people maybe watching. You feel just by human nature that as a pitcher, I need to cut some fastballs loose there. I need to throw some hammers there and cut them loose. And so unfortunately, even if you quote unquote, and I know this is a big word with, Glenn, the studies on perceived effort, and I'm sure you and I have talked about that too. It's just sort of day 2, there's way more risk with quote unquote perceived effort. Definitely. And managing that versus on day 3, we don't have to worry about perceived effort because we actually want the effort for the most part because they're ready for it.
Absolutely. That's a valid point. And I actually hadn't thought of it in that context for sure. But hey, this was awesome. We've gone into much more detail than I ever expected. That's the nice thing about long toss is it leads to so many other important discussions when you're talking athleticism and range of motion and arm speed and all that fun stuff. So Alan, folks can find you on Twitter and Instagram. It's at Jaeger Sports. Yep. And then you've also got some awesome online materials. Where's the best place for folks to start to learn more about a lot of the insights that you've shared today?
So much free information, at jaegersports.com. I'm sorry, jaegersports.com is our website. There's an article link. There is tons of free information. YouTube, we have long toss. We have a lot of mental game stuff that's all free, easy to access. So it's easy to find more of this information, just with a click.
Yeah, and outstanding stuff. I can speak to it as not just a friend of Alan's, but also a consumer as information for a long time here. He's been very impactful for our players and a great resource to me. So definitely head to jaegersports.com, check it out. Show them some love for some J bands. They didn't get any love on this show, but definitely an integral part of our training arsenal as well. So everything from mental skills to long toss to actual equipment. We got a lot of good stuff. So check them out.
I appreciate it, man. And I just want to say one thing too. We go back a long way, and you've been instrumental for me. And I don't want to just say this because it's your podcast, but I'm just saying this as friends that, I appreciate you having me on, but at the same time, you have been not only inspiring to me, but you've been extremely helpful with your insight. And so a lot of this stuff we talk about, you've had an influence on me as well. And so, I just want people out there to know that, we've had a chance to really share a lot over the years, and we're both into the highest good. And I think that's the cool thing. What was the words you used earlier about not being this, but being that when it comes to critiquing things or discussing things.
Oh, if there's disagreeing, there's dislike, and you can always disagree politely. But I think at the end of the day, when a rising tide lifts all ships. If everybody's trying to make things better for the athletes in front of us, we're doing our job.
Yep.
So.
And also, let's just let people know too, and it's not a shameless plug, but a plug. But so much of this information, I put a lot of time and effort into our year-round throwing manual. And so there's just a lot of information. I try to keep it very, very clear and simple and easy to adapt and very individualistic, even though there's a lot of suggestions in there. So I just want to make sure people know it's a resource that we have. It's called our year-round throwing manual. And also I have to plug, our mental game book, because me, that's near and dear to my heart, the mental game. And, but listen, man, I just have to thank you for having me on. And I always enjoy our time together. I always get better. And again, I really appreciate you having me on, buddy.
This was lots of fun. Thanks for doing it, Alan.
You know what, brother? We'll be in touch, man.
For sure.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.